issue. What should you really do? You should make sure you do not fall into the dilemma. I know 2 ways to avoid it. One is, don't have any friends. That's what the proprietary developers have in mind for your future. No real friends. You could have Facebook friends instead. But the other way, my way, is reject the program. If you don't have the program, you can't fall into the dilemma. You just tell your friend, I don't have it. So, if someone offers me a program, no matter how attractive it might be, on the conditions that I not share it with you, I tell him my conscience does not permit me to accept those conditions, so I don't want the program. Take your nasty program out of here. And that's what you should say also. Reject software that lacks freedom too. And reject also the propaganda terminology that they use to demonize cooperation and sharing. Words like pirate. When they call people who share pirates, what are they really saying? They're saying that helping other people is the moral equivalent of attacking ships. Well, morally speaking, that's as false as you can get, because attacking ships is very bad, but sharing is good. So let's not call them both by the same name. Now, in the case of the pirate party, well, I'm willing to say their name, because they are trying to take this insult and turn it around into a badge of pride. Well, that tactic sometimes works. There's no reason you shouldn't try. But other than that, let's refuse to use the word pirate to refer to people who share. When people ask me what I think of piracy, I tell them attacking ships is very bad. But fortunately, we're not very close to Somalia. And if they ask me what I think of movie piracy, I can say that I enjoyed the first Pirates of the Caribbean. You get the point. I look for a pointed way to refuse to use their term. It's very important to refuse to repeat the enemy's propaganda. That's the reason for freedom too, the freedom to help others, essential on fundamental moral grounds. Freedom 0, the freedom to run the program as you wish, is essential so you can control your computing. Every user deserves to control her computing. So, there are proprietary programs that deny even this basic freedom. They say, well, their licenses restrict the use of even the authorized copies. For instance, there's a proprietary program for managing websites whose license forbids using it to publish anything that criticizes the developer. In this case, proprietary software literally denies freedom of speech. Well, if you can't even freely use the copy that's supposed to be for you to use, you don't control your computing. Thus, freedom 0 is essential. But it's not enough, because that only means you can either do or not do whatever the code of the program is already set up to let you do. Which means the developer continues to impose his control over the users, not through the license if you have freedom 0, but still through the code itself. Thus, in order to have control over your computing, you need freedom 1, the freedom to study the source code and change it so it does your computing as you wish. This way you decide and not him. If you don't have freedom 1, you can't even tell what that program really does. And many non-free programs have malicious features designed to do things like spy on the user, restrict the user, and there are even back doors that allow someone remotely to do things to the user. In fact, most users of proprietary software are using proprietary malware. Let me prove it. In other words, this is not a rare danger. This is the usual case to be the victim of malicious features. So let me prove it just with some examples. One proprietary package in which people have found all of those three kinds of malicious features that you may have heard of is called Microsoft Windows. People have found surveillance features. Of course, the digital handcuffs, the features to restrict what users can do with the data in their own computers, these are visible. If the machine says, I won't let you do that, or just pretends it has no idea what you mean, you can see that. The back doors, however, are not so easily seen, but people have discovered at least 2 back doors in Windows. So Windows is malware. However, I can make a stronger claim. Windows is universal malware. You see, one of these back doors allows Microsoft to remotely install software changes without getting permission from the theoretical owner of the computer. In other words, any malicious feature that is not in Windows today could be remotely installed tomorrow. I say theoretical owner of the computer because once Microsoft has Windows running in that computer, Microsoft has owned that computer. So Windows is universal malware, but it's not alone. macOS is also malware. It has known digital handcuffs. These digital handcuff features are also known as DRM, Digital Restrictions Management, or Gestion Numérique de Restriction. But that's funny. I switched into French mode and anyway, and Apple has been known to release harmful upgrades and arrange it such that users would lose existing features if they didn't install these upgrades. So the Macintosh system is malware, but the newer Apple computer products, the iThings, are worse. People have found 2 different surveillance features in them. They have the nastiest digital handcuffs ever in general purpose computers. Apple is the pioneer in attacking users' freedom. It was Apple that was the first to make general purpose computers in which users were not even allowed to choose what programs to install and freely install any program. They weren't allowed to install their own software. Of course, once Apple did it, Microsoft did it too. But still, Apple was the pioneer in this form of malicious feature. And when users find ways to break those particular handcuffs, they call it jailbreaking, effectively recognizing that these products are designed as jails. And there's a backdoor. So the Apple computer products are malware. Flash Player is malware. It has a surveillance feature and it has digital handcuffs. Now, Flash Player is not free software, but it is gratis. Does that matter? Being gratis means that Adobe does not require users to pay to be abused. Now, I recently learned that Internet Explorer is also malware, since it has a sort of surveillance feature and backdoor that was provided for the use of the dictator of Tunisia. So, I guess I should add Internet Explorer to my list, except I usually think of it as part of Windows.
We use Internet Explorer only for download
Firefox.
Well, but you shouldn't be using Windows. So, the Amazon swindle is malware. Of course, that's not its official name. Its official name is the Kindle, but I think swindle is a better name because that product swindles users, swindles readers out of the traditional freedoms of readers of books. For instance, there's the freedom to acquire a book anonymously, paying cash. That option does not exist with the swindle for books that are in print. Most of them. The only way to get them is from Amazon, and Amazon requires users to identify themselves. So Amazon maintains a giant database of all the books each user has read. And such a database is a threat to human rights. We must not tolerate its existence anywhere. Then there is the freedom to give a book to someone else, or lend it to people, or sell it to a used bookstore. Amazon eliminates these freedoms with digital handcuffs in the swindle. Together with end-user license agreements, Amazon says Amazon does not respect private property. Amazon says that users can't own books. They can only get a license to read a book under Amazon's choice of imposed conditions. And then there's the freedom to keep the book as long as you wish, and perhaps someday pass it on to your children. Amazon eliminates this freedom with a back door. We don't know all the things this back door can do. We can't study its source code. All we know is what we have seen. In 2009, Amazon remotely erased thousands of copies of a particular book. Copies which, until that day, were authorized copies. They had been obtained directly from Amazon in the usual way, and then one day Amazon decided they were no longer authorized and made them disappear. And the book with which Amazon showed the users the Orwellian nature of this product was 1984 by George Orwell. A book that you should all read because it's about a totalitarian state. It's the book that gave us the saying, Big Brother is watching you. Big Brother was the figurehead of that state, and he was surveilling everything. And the crimes of that state started with destroying books that it didn't like, and got worse from there. So everyone should read 1984, but not on the swindle. The official name of that product is the Kindle. Kindle means to start a fire. I think this name hints that the purpose of that product is to burn our books. And then Another example is most portable phones. They have a surveillance feature. They send the location determined using GPS. And typically they have a back door, a universal back door allowing remote installation of software without asking the user's permission, which has been used to convert these phones into listening devices. This is why I don't have one. So I have now listed examples which cover almost all users of proprietary software, and thus prove my point. Almost all users of proprietary software are using proprietary malware. They are victims of malicious features. But what about all the other proprietary programs about which we may know nothing? We don't know whether they have malicious features or not. And we can't check either. So if they don't have Freedom 1, we can't check. So we have to treat them as potential malware. A program without Freedom 1 is just trust me software. Trust us because we're a big corporation, and you know a big corporation would never mistreat people. So I suppose that some of them were developed honestly and have no malicious features, but their developers are human, so they make mistakes, and those programs do have bugs. And the user of a program without Freedom 1 is just as helpless facing an accidental error as facing an intentional malicious feature. If you use a program without Freedom 1, you're a prisoner of the program. We free software developers are human too. We also make mistakes. The code of our free programs has bugs too, because every non-trivial program has bugs. But if you find a bug in our free code or anything in the code you don't like,
It's a bug.
If you are carrying a portable tracking and surveillance device, please switch it off. They already tracked you here. They know you're listening to me. You don't have to keep sending out this information. And if they want to listen to the talk, well, they were invited to come. Right? They don't need to listen through your phone. So please switch it off. So, where was I? Right. So, if you find anything in our code you don't like, you're free to change it because we did not make you our prisoner. We can't be perfect. We can respect the freedom. So, Freedom 1 is essential. But it's not enough, because that's the freedom to either to personally study and change the source code, or to do so within one organization. Well, that's not enough, because there are millions of users that don't know how to program. They can't exercise Freedom 1 directly. But even for programmers like me, Freedom 1 is not enough, because we're busy doing certain jobs, and we don't have time. In fact, no user could possibly have time to study the source code of all the free programs that she uses, and then, or to personally write all the changes she might want, because there's so much free software in the world already that that's more, to master what you use is more work than one human being can possibly do. So the only way we can fully have control of our computing is by working together, cooperating. And for that we need Freedom 3, the freedom to distribute copies of your modified versions when you wish. That makes it possible for all the users to benefit. First of all, Freedom 3 makes it possible for several users of a program to work together in changing it, because they can distribute their versions back and forth between them. And then if they arrive at a version which they're happy with, they can also publish it, invite everybody to use it. And even the users that don't know how to program will be able to use that version if they like it better. Without Freedom 3, yes, each user would be free to write the change, but what a waste it would be to write the same change millions of times, and the non-programmers would be excluded completely. This is not good enough. So Freedom 3 is essential. Thus, I've now demonstrated that all 4 of these freedoms are essential, and all users get the benefit of the 4 freedoms. Every user can exercise freedom 0 and 2, the freedom to run the program as you wish, and the freedom to redistribute exact copies, because these don't require programming knowledge. Freedoms 1 and 3, to study and change the source code and to distribute copies of your version, these entail programming. So any given user can exercise these more or less according to how much that user knows how to program. And of course, there are people who know how to make some easy changes, and that's useful, even though it doesn't go as far as being a really good programmer. It's still better than nothing. But there are many people who don't learn any programming and don't want to. They can't exercise these freedoms. But when others who are programmers change the same programs and publish modified versions, they get to install those modified versions if they wish. So they get the benefit of living in a society where the users have the 4 freedoms. And the 4 freedoms together give us democracy, because a free program develops democratically under the control of its users. Every user is free to participate as much or as little as she wishes in society's decision about the future of this program, which is simply the sum total of what the users decide to do with it. By contrast, a proprietary program develops under the sole and total power of its developer, essentially a dictatorship. And that program then serves as an instrument to subjugate users whom the developer can then command, exploit, and abuse. Thus, society has a choice to make. On one side, we have individual freedom, social solidarity, and democracy. On the other side, we have the dictatorship of the developer who can mistreat users. Society must reject proprietary software and choose free software. Thus, the ultimate goal of the free software movement is the liberation of cyberspace and all of its inhabitants. We invite you to escape from proprietary software and come join us in the free world that we have built. I launched the free software movement in 1983 because I wanted to make it possible to use computers in freedom. It was impossible in 1983 because the computer won't do anything without an operating system installed. And all the operating systems in '83 for modern computers were proprietary, which meant that if you bought a new computer, in order to make it good for anything, it had to have a proprietary system in it, and there went your freedom. How could I change that? I was one man without much fame outside of the users of Emacs, and without much money, and few people agreed with me, so it didn't look like an ordinary political movement protesting in the street and publishing and mailing letters would get very far. And besides, I had no experience doing that. I was not a political organizer. I was an operating system developer. So, what could I do? Well, as an operating system developer, there was another way I could achieve the same result. All I had to do was write an operating system. Then, as its author, I could legally make it free software, and then everybody would be able to run computers in freedom by using my system. In other words, I had a way to enable people to escape from proprietary software through technical work in my own field. I was aware of the injustice of proprietary software, which most people did not recognize as an injustice. I had the skills necessary to help people escape from this injustice, and it looked like, or at least to try, and it looked like no one else was going to try if not me. That meant I had been elected by circumstances to do this work. It's as if you see somebody drowning and you know how to swim and there's no one else around and it's not Bush. Then you have a moral duty to save this person if you can. Well, perhaps that statement is too strong. Perhaps there are some other people we could identify, like Ben Ali and Obama and others who support torture, about whom I should not make the claim that you have a duty to save them. Fortunately, I don't need to resolve all those questions because I don't know how to swim. But in the case that really arose in my life, the work to be done was not swimming. It was writing lots of software, and that I knew how to do. So I decided to develop a free software operating system, one that would be made up entirely of free software with no exception. And then I decided to recruit others to help to get it finished sooner. Then I decided to make it a Unix-like system. Unix was a proprietary operating system with some good technical features. It was portable. It could be adapted to new models of computer. I wanted to make a portable system also. This way, the system would be portable. And also, by making it upward compatible with Unix, all the users of Unix would find it easy to switch to my system. They could use my system without learning anything because they already knew how. And then I gave it a name, which is a joke. The name of the system is GNU. And it's a joke because it's a recursive acronym. It stands for, it's spelled GNU, and it stands for GNU's Not Unix. Well, programmers love jokes involving recursion. But in order to be a joke, it needs another meaning. Why GNU and not ANU, FNU, SNU, UNU? Because those are not words, at least not in the language I knew. But GNU is a word. In fact, it's the most humor-charged word in the English language, used in countless wordplays, because according to the dictionary, the G is silent and it's pronounced new. So every time you want to write the word new, instead of spelling it N-E-W, you can write it G-N-U and you've got a joke. Perhaps not a very good joke. But there are lots of them. So people have been conditioned to associate that word with humor. You see the word and you're almost ready to laugh. Given a meaningful, specific reason to use it as the name of a programming project, I could not resist. But when it's the name of our system, please do not follow the dictionary. If you say the new operating system, you will make a false statement because we've been working on it for 28 years now and using it for 20 years, so it's not new anymore. but it still is GNU. And it will always be GNU. So please be careful not to pronounce it new. Don't say it as GNU because that's too much work and other people won't want to repeat it. But there's one other pronunciation error that is very common that you need to avoid, which sounds like Linux. I'm sure you will encounter people who talk about the GNU system and say the name Linux. They even write it wrong. But how did this error get to be so common? Well, certain people started the confusion and it spread from there. During the 80s, our work in the GNU project was to come up with all the hundreds of components that were needed for a complete Unix-like system. At the beginning, it was something like 200. By the end, it was much more. So, in some cases, we were lucky, and somebody else wrote a suitable program that we could use as a piece of GNU. But that was luck. It sometimes happened and sometimes didn't. Sometimes I wrote the program myself. Sometimes I recruited somebody else to write a program. And in some cases, I convinced someone to free a proprietary program. For instance, I visited the University of California to ask the developers of BSD to liberate their code. BSD at the time was a proprietary modified version of Unix, which contained a lot of Unix itself, plus code from Berkeley. Well, I asked them to please separate their code from the AT&T code and release their code as free software. And the reason I was concerned about this is I knew that some of those would be components I could use in GNU if they released them as free software. And they subsequently did. But, so as a result of this, by 1990 we had almost all the system. But what was missing was one essential major component, the kernel, which is the program that allocates the computer's resources to the other programs you run. In 1990, the Free Software Foundation hired someone to write a kernel for us. I chose the design, and I chose an elegant, advanced design that I thought would enable us to finish it sooner. But it backfired because it gave the project the nature of research, and it took 6 years to get a test version to run. And it still needs a lot of work to be competitive. Well, that was sad. Of course, nobody succeeds in every project. But in any case, we didn't have to wait for that, because in 1992, Mr. Torvalds, who had written a proprietary kernel called Linux, made it free software. He released it under the GNU General Public License, which was one of several free software licenses in use at the time. And once Linux became free software, you could make a complete system by putting Linux together with all the pieces that were going to be GNU. And the resulting system was basically GNU, but it had Linux in it. So you could call it GNU/Linux to give a share of the credit to Mr. Torvalds. But the people who combined Linux with all the components that were waiting to be the GNU system were so focused on this one piece, Linux, that they perceived all the rest as just stuff they were adding to Linux. They didn't realize that effectively they were adding Linux to the GNU system. And that all that stuff was there because we were accumulating it to make the GNU system. So they started calling this combination a Linux system, and other people imitated them, and that's how it is that millions of people use this derivative of the GNU system, and they don't mention GNU at all, and and they think that the whole system was started in 1991 by Mr. Torvalds, which is not nice because they're not giving us any of the credit. So please call it GNU/Linux or GNU plus Linux. Please give us equal mention. Since we're the system's principal developers, we develop more of it than anyone else, and we started the development, we set the goal. I think that's enough reason to give us at least equal mention. So if you see someone else calling the whole system Linux, please ask him to be more careful. I'll take the questions at the end, unless you're asking me to clarify something I just said because it wasn't clear. That you should do right away. But other than that, I'd rather take the questions at the end. So, but this error in naming has more important effects than that. Because when people think the system is Linux, they think it was started by Mr. Torvalds, and they think it comes from Mr. Torvalds' vision of life. And then they tend to admire him very much and imitate his views. And what are his views? He never agreed with the free software movement. He's released important pieces of free software, but he doesn't agree that users deserve freedom. He doesn't think that you deserve freedom as a user of software. He doesn't think he deserves freedom as a user of software. He just doesn't think that that's a real issue. So he says that he wants powerful, reliable software. And sometimes he talks about cooperation between developers, but he doesn't see an issue of the freedom of the users. Well, he has a right to his views. But it's not right that the tremendous work that we did for the sake of your freedom be attributed to him and serve as a platform for him to spread views opposed to the motivation for developing the system. And worse, it puts freedom in danger for all of us. Because when the users think that the system is Linux and that it was developed by him and comes from his vision of life,